So, you've been playing Airsoft for a little while now, and no doubt you have come across a need or attempted to justify a need for a multitude of weapons. Whether that's because you're transitioning from different game sites and you've gone from a woodland environment to a CQB, or whether it's just because you fancy performing a few different roles on different days. A sniper one day, a support gunner the next. Whatever the justification, it can become an expensive game. But what if, with perhaps a slightly higher initial outlay, you could have one gun that could serve you on a multitude of different game days in a multitude of different ways? That gun could be the Wolverine MTW. Now I can already hear the sharp intake of breath from a few of you out there in YouTube land. This is of course a HPA gun. We have a high pressure airline coming out of the pistol grip, and these are met with somewhat skepticism. Not skepticism, that's the wrong word. They're divisive. It's a Marmite gun. You either love them or you hate them. If you love them, it's likely because you already own one and you've become accustomed to its excellent performance, the range you can get out of these things, its level of accuracy, etc. If you hate them, maybe it's because you've been on the opposing end of one and you just can't get close enough to the player to engage because they have that much more range than you, can lay down that much more plastic, and it can sort of feel like they're cheating a little bit. Or, slightly more seriously, maybe you're a site owner who views these with a certain amount of skepticism because they are open to abuse. And that's not just the Wolverine MTW, it's any HPA system out there at all. Because of course they are regulated, they have regulators on them, but unless you have a locked collar on them, they can be dialed up throughout the game day. And if they're not regularly tested, and you have a particular brand of player who likes to push the limits, they can turn these into very, very dangerous platforms in the pursuit of a little bit more performance. So dangerous, in fact, they can crack your eye protection and that kind of thing quite easily. Certainly they're going to leave players with a multitude of bruises if they've been lit up by one and that kind of thing. And that's where a lot of the negative press comes from bad use. So, let's get back to this particular gun. Why do I feel the Wolverine MTW could be the one gun that you need for every occasion? Well, essentially it's because it isn't one gun. And it's part of the reason I can't do a true quote-unquote review of the Wolverine MTW, because I have here just one in a multitude of different options you can purchase from Wolverine under the MTW brand. So what we'll do is make our way through the weapon as we traditionally do, but I'll talk you through some of the different options you can get as we do it. Like I say, it can't be a true review because I can only attest to the performance of this particular one. But we will endeavour to give you a good overview of the platform. Right, starting up as ever, up at the front, we have a 14mm counterclockwise thread regardless of the options you choose. So you will always be able to add a tracer, a suppressor, whatever you want on the end. Now on that note, it is worth spending out on a real nice high quality suppressor for these. They're not incredibly noisy guns to begin with. They do make a distinctive noise, but with the use of a really nice actually working suppressor, a nice foam filled system, then you can really quieten these down to the point where they are, you know, a silent but deadly device. It's of real worth to those of you who might want to run these things as a DMR or a sniper role, that kind of thing, just to be able to quieten them down a little bit more, keep your concealment, etc., etc. Right, moving back to the handguard and the barrels. Here's where we get, again, regardless, we get 3 different options. We essentially get a 14, a 10 and a 7-inch barrel length. There are some half inches in there as well. But essentially you get the 14 DMR, you get a 10 sort of standard assault rifle size and a 7 CQB size. Now, with regard to the barrels that they use, depending on whether you go for the forged or the billet series rifle, you get 2 different barrels inside. I can't attest to the difference in performance of either of them. Essentially, mine that you see here is the billet series. We have no forward assist on the upper receiver. It comes with different hop unit, different inner barrel, that kind of thing. But mine is completely standard from the factory, and I can tell you that at around 350 FPS, I can reach 80 meters, no problem at all, just because of the way this thing flies. So, actually no, that's a lie. When it dialed up to DMR, I can reach that. As a standard AR platform, I can accurately, on 350 feet, 350 FPS, I can accurately, and I mean accurately, this thing is a deadly accurate device. I can accurately hit targets at 50. So, what we get is, with regard to the handguards, depending upon the age of the system, because I do believe there are some slightly older variants still around, the handguards may change ever so slightly. On this particular one, we have a small little pick rail at the bottom, we get a monolithic Picatinny rail across the top, and we get some M-lock sections down the side. This is actually the standard rail that comes with the Wolverine. Mine has just been Cerakoted, as has the upper receiver there, because like I've already mentioned, these things get customized once they're out of the shop as well. You can, with the Wolverine, use real steel firearm furniture. So you don't have to stick to just airsoft handguards. You can go for a real Daniel Defense setup or whatever takes your fancy. This is actually running Daniel Defense furniture at the rear, but just the standard rail at the front. Obviously accessorized with some foregrips, etc. But yeah, it's nice to know that you can put whatever you want on, whether that be real steel or airsoft. The world is your oyster. Hugely customizable. Once we come back to the upper receiver, as I talked about before, there are 2 different series, the forged and the billet. One has the forward assist, slightly different internals and that kind of thing, but the performance, to all intents and purposes, is very, very similar. Exceptional, to all intents and purposes. Come down into the lower, and we get the fire control unit. This is all programmable, regardless of the series you use. So we can lock it to semi if we wanted to. You can have 3-round bursts. That's what mine's set up to, as opposed to full auto. The trigger is programmable for rate of fire and actually pull length as well. So if you were to pop open the body pins, look down inside just above the trigger section, you can actually use a very small Allen key and just adjust the pull of the trigger to the point where mine is actually little more than a mouse click. So you can get insane trigger response out of these things, and even if you are locked to single fire or semi-auto, you can still spam the trigger so fast it appears to be full auto. The magazines and the magwell, we actually have a working bolt release here, because if you were to utilize the standard Wolverine magazines, much like an NGRS system from a Tokyo Marui, you get a little tiny flap at the rear of the magazine which just stops the gun from firing when the magazine is empty. You can, like I've used, just use standard AR-15 or Stanang style mags, and you just lose that capability. But you gain a little bit more in firepower because the Wolverine mags are mid-cap. So, and this is a mid-cap as well, but there's a better mid-cap. Anyway, like I say, we can use real steel furniture as well as airsoft furniture at the rear. It's also worth pointing out that this is where the system can change as well. So what we have here is the standard sort of HPA system, line coming out of the pistol grip, and then you utilize a bottle and an air line, etc., to provide air to the system. You can, Wolverine, do an aero stock where you essentially have one of these bottles, albeit more slimline, acting as your stock at the rear. It gets covered up to a degree, but it then creates like a bulbous stock system at the rear. But essentially it feeds all the air in. It doesn't look particularly nice, I don't think, and detracts from, well, as real as this gun gets with a bloody great line coming out the back of it. But it detracts from it a little bit. I have heard mixed reviews on how that actually performs and how well it performs. You can also get a CO2 bulb variant, I believe. And again, same sort of mixed reviews if you trawl around YouTube, etc. for that and the forums. I think in general, the sort of line and bottle system appears to be the best you can go for. Although that has its own drawbacks in its own right, which we'll talk about in a minute. So, why do I think this is the one gun to rule them all? Well, it's not. You can't, you can't necessarily say that, but it is very, very, very good. Its performance, as I've already said, you can dial it up. I can, put the regulator up, get DMR levels of power out of it, and she'll reach 80, 85 meters all day long, very, very accurately. The best accuracy is in the sort of standard range at about 350 FPS, where I can consistently hit head-sized targets at, not saying you should aim for the head, don't do that, but you could hit a head-sized target at 50 meters, pretty much no problem at all. It's so consistent in the way the BB flies, it's insane. These things are, they're as good as everyone says. Alternatively, then you can, dial it down and use it in CQB and all the rest of it as well. And I think if you go for like the 10-inch system that we see here, the sort of traditional assault rifle system, it's long enough that the accuracy is good enough over distance to give you a massive advantage over a lot of players anyway, but it's still short enough that if I was to remove this particular suppressor, perhaps run something, a little tracer for CQB or something like that, it still feels short enough that I can wield the weapon and use it in CQB without feeling like I'm at a massive disadvantage to anyone who's using a little stubby SMG or anything of the sort. So it really is that gun you can take anywhere and do anything with. It's worth pointing out as well that you could put a box mag on the bottom of it. It's not going to look particularly nice in my view, but you could get away with it. You could put a box mag on the bottom of it, turn it into an LMG, and reprogram the trigger so that it's turning into a bullet hose. So you could run the support gunner role, albeit not with an official support gun. You could turn it into a DMR platform. You can run it like an assault rifle, and you will never actually need another gun again. You might want another gun, but there won't be the need for it. So it's very, very capable. But what are the downsides? Well, the obvious is the outlay and cost. These are not cheap systems to get involved with. The gun itself is quite expensive, but with a good line, regulator and bottle, you're probably not going to get a lot of change out of about, in all honesty, if you go for good quality stuff, 800 quid. And that's just for the base rifle. If you want something that looks a little bit more like this, with, you know, real steel furniture, optics, pet boxes, etc., torches, you know, it creeps up fast. I won't tell you the exact price just in case my other half is listening. But yeah, suffice to say, it can get expensive quick, but it will be the only outlay you need, essentially. The other downside is, all comes down to the air system. How much do you fancy, and excuse me while I disappear out of the camera while I put the rifle down, how much do you fancy carrying one of these on your back? There are many retention systems you can use. You can put it in, I've seen people put them just in backpacks and allow them to float around in the backpack and roll around. That to me seems absurd. That would be hugely uncomfortable, just rolling around and rocking around as you're running. You can get Viper do a very nice system, like a little bottle retention system, just wide enough for one of these slightly bigger bottles to go in, and then you Velcro strap them in so that they're nice and tight. So they're in a bag, the bag then gets Velcroed and it's mollied to your back. That's about the most secure one, I think. You can get systems to go on a war belt as well. The bottle almost mounts horizontally across the back. I just worry about stuff like that in case I fall over, which I'm prone to do. But yeah, so because I'm getting old. But yeah, it can be a bit of a downside. And then obviously, regardless of the weight of these bottles as well, you're unlikely to actually puncture one of these things if you fell on it. I suppose it is a possibility. It would essentially be a bomb strapped to your back, but hugely unlikely. Just be a bit careful. The other downside of this system is, of course, this line, which then trails out underneath your arm, behind you, however you have it mounted. Some people have tried to sort of like retain it to their forearm and stuff like this to minimize how much it can sort of float around. That just limits movement more. But in a woodland environment or anything of the such, there is a risk of snagging and that kind of thing. So it's not ideal. It detracts from the realism a little bit, but if you can get over all of that, great system. So we've talked about the bottle itself and the potential bomb on your back, the running around with it, the line. The other problem is filling these things up. Unless you have access to like a dive school or something like that, a lot of sites can fill them up, but once they run out of air, they run out of air. You can, on Amazon and eBay, purchase little compressors that will work. You're going to want to pay probably anywhere between £200 and £300 for a nice one that will fill one of these bottles up in about 15 minutes, I want to say, something like that. You can do the math. But suffice to say, if you forked out for one of those, that would keep everything in-house then, and you can sort of fill it up. You can even get ones that run off the car batteries, so you could put it in the boot of your car, etc. A very nice gentleman at one of the sites local to me had one of those and filled my bottle up from his boot, and it was tremendous and led me to want one for myself, but I just haven't been bothered yet. But yeah, suffice to say, there are options available, but if you're not willing to outlay another £300 on top of the cost of potentially a very expensive setup already, then you are going to be needing to utilize someone else to fill your bottle up for you. A lot of people only charge sort of £2.50 to fill up a bottle, etc., but it's more about the pain and of going out of your way to fill it up, whereas if you had an AEG, you just charge the batteries up at home before. and that kind of deal. So it can be a bit more involved. It can be a bit more finicky in terms of you know, how you might set yourself up for the day. But if you can get over all of that, then you can have yourself a rifle that can pretty much outperform 95% of the field on any given game day, and can perform any field you want it to, because you can take it into a multitude of environments and a multitude of game styles. So yeah, that's been my overview of the Wolverine MTW platform, we'll say. If it's been of any help to you in a future purchase, or you've just found my nonsensical ramblings of enjoyment, then please like and subscribe. It is welcome, and it does go a long way to help the channel as I look to progress things throughout the year. We are at Christmas, so feel it as a bit of Christmas spirit, maybe. Thank you very much, guys. I shall see you in the next one. Have a good one, and have a good new year.